Imagine this: a single barrel of oil moves markets, shapes politics, and decides the fate of nations. From the price at the gas pump to the stability of currencies, oil touches every corner of modern life. In 2023, the world consumed over 100 million barrels of oil per day, and each barrel was worth around $70 to $80. That's billions of dollars flowing through the global economy every single day. But oil is more than a commodity. It's power, influence, and sometimes danger. In the next 8 minutes, you'll understand how oil became the lifeblood of the global economy, why oil prices can make or break entire countries, how oil affects inflation, jobs, and trade, the geopolitical games fueled by black gold, and what the future holds as the world shifts toward green energy. This isn't just about fuel, this is about money, power, and the mechanics of global economies. 1. The birth of the oil economy. Before oil, economies relied on coal, wood, and water power. Industrialization demanded energy, and energy demanded oil. The modern oil industry began in 1859, when Edwin Drake drilled the first commercial oil well in Pennsylvania. From there, oil rapidly transformed industries. Railroads ran faster. Factories could operate 24/7. Cities lit up with kerosene and electricity. By the early 20th century, oil was no longer just energy. It became wealth. Companies like Standard Oil, controlled by John D. Rockefeller, grew into the first global corporations, commanding enormous influence over markets and governments. Did you know Rockefeller's fortune, adjusted for inflation, would be over $400 billion today? That's more than the combined wealth of the world's top billionaires. Oil became the backbone of industrial economies. Nations that controlled it thrived. Nations without it struggled. 2. Oil and the rise of global economies. Fast forward to the post-World War II era. Oil was critical to rebuilding economies devastated by conflict. Europe's Marshall Plan relied on energy imports, primarily oil from the United States and the Middle East. By the 1950s and 60s, the US produced over 9 million barrels per day, fueling cars, industries, and suburban expansion. Japan, with almost no domestic oil, depended heavily on imports to power its economic miracle. Oil-rich nations like Saudi Arabia and Kuwait began using petroleum wealth to build modern infrastructure. Oil wasn't just fuel, it was the engine of growth. The price of a barrel could make or break entire economies. In 1973, an oil embargo by OPEC nations sent oil prices from $3 per barrel to $12 per barrel in months. That quadrupling triggered the first global energy crisis, causing inflation, unemployment, and recession in the West. 3. Oil prices and inflation. The invisible hand oil is embedded in almost everything. It powers transport, heats homes, and even produces plastics and fertilizers. When oil prices rise, transportation costs increase, leads to goods become more expensive. Manufacturing costs rise, leads to companies pass expenses to consumers. Energy bills soar. Households spend more, saving less. This creates inflationary pressure, which central banks fight with higher interest rates. For example, the 1979 oil crisis saw crude prices rise from $14 to $39 per barrel, pushing U.S. inflation to 13.5%. In 2022, energy accounted for nearly 8% of U.S. consumer inflation, with gas prices peaking over $5 per gallon in some states. Inflation isn't just numbers. High oil prices can trigger social unrest, from strikes to protests, because it directly affects what people pay to live. 4. Oil and employment. The oil industry isn't just about barrels, it's about jobs. Globally, the oil sector directly employs over 3 million people. Indirectly, through services, construction, and transport, it supports tens of millions more. Countries like Saudi Arabia, Norway, and Texas, US, rely heavily on oil for employment and government revenue. In Texas, oil and gas account for over $100 billion annually in state revenue. Imagine a sudden drop in oil prices by 50%. Entire regions could see massive job losses, budget deficits, and economic contraction almost overnight. 5. Oil and trade balances. Oil is also a key factor in international trade. Countries either export it for revenue or import it to fuel growth. Top exporters in 2023: Saudi Arabia, Russia, Iraq, and the US. Top importers: China, India, Japan, and Western Europe. Trade deficits and surpluses often hinge on oil. Russia earns over $400 billion annually from oil exports. Japan Japan, lacking domestic oil, imports over 4 million barrels per day, spending billions every month. Countries dependent on oil imports are vulnerable. Even small price fluctuations can ripple through their economies, affecting everything from trade deficits to the value of their currency. 6. Oil and geopolitics. Power on the global stage. Oil isn't just an economic tool, it's a geopolitical weapon. Control oil and you influence politics. 1973, OPEC embargo punished countries supporting Israel, showing oil could be a political weapon. US sanctions on Iran and Venezuela limit oil exports, affecting global prices. Russia's oil and gas exports play a central role in its influence over Europe. In 2022, when Russian oil exports were restricted due to geopolitical tensions, global oil prices briefly hit $130 per barrel, threatening inflation worldwide. Oil can shift power without firing a single bullet, because nations cannot operate without it. 7. Oil and the environment, a costly trade-off. While oil fuels growth, it comes at a cost: the environment. Burning fossil fuels contributes to CO2 emissions, which now exceed 36 billion metric tons annually. Oil spills, like Exxon Valdez, 1989, and Deepwater Horizon, 2010, caused billions in economic and environmental damage. Transitioning away from oil requires trillions in investment in renewable energy. Some estimates suggest that every $1 increase in oil prices can push $100 billion to $200 billion into global inflationary costs annually, including environmental mitigation, fuel subsidies, and health costs. 8. Oil crises and economic vulnerability. History shows that oil crises expose weaknesses in economies. 1973 oil crisis leads to stagflation in the US. 1979 energy crisis to global recession. 2020 COVID-19 crash to oil prices went negative briefly, demonstrating fragility of markets. Did you know that in April 2020, West Texas Intermediate (WTI) oil briefly traded at negative $37 per barrel? Producers were effectively paying buyers to take oil due to storage shortages. That's a $2 trillion shock to global energy markets in days. 9. The future: green energy versus oil dependence. The 21st century faces a paradox. Economies are still heavily dependent on oil, but the planet cannot afford continued fossil fuel growth. Global trends. EV adoption is skyrocketing. 2023 saw over 14 million electric vehicles sold, reducing some demand for oil. Renewable energy investment exceeds $500 billion annually. Oil demand may peak in the next 10 to 15 years, depending on policy and technology. Yet, oil isn't going away overnight. Petrochemicals, aviation, and shipping still rely heavily on oil. Even with green energy, oil revenues still fund governments, wars, and infrastructure. For example, Saudi Arabia's Vision 2030 plan depends on oil profits to diversify its economy. Nigeria relies on oil for over 80% of its export revenue. Oil is more than black liquid in the ground. It's a pillar of modern economies, a tool of geopolitics, and a measure of global power. Consider this: daily global consumption, 100+ million barrels. Annual revenue from oil exports, hundreds of billions per major producer. Economic leverage can shape inflation, trade balances, and employment worldwide. The question isn't whether oil matters. It's how economies adapt to its volatility and eventual decline. Nations that understand this will thrive. Those that don't will suffer sudden shocks. Oil has built empires, toppled governments, and shaped the modern world. Its power reaches beyond the gas pump, affecting inflation, trade, jobs, and global influence. Every price shift, every barrel produced or withheld, can ripple across economies and nations. If you found this insight valuable, hit that subscribe button and join us for more deep dives into the forces shaping our world.